Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Gatch, and I'm a research biologist at the USGS Great Lakes Science Center, stationed in Cortland, New York. Today, I'm going to be presenting on a rather large acoustic telemetry project in Lake Ontario, where we're trying to identify spawning distributions of lake trout. There's quite a few co-authors on this presentation, so I want to just take a second to acknowledge them and say thank you very much for the support in this project. Our partners in Canada included Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Fisheries and Oceans Canada. From the US, our partners included New York Sea Grant, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, Lower Great Lakes, FWECO, the USGS, and New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Our funding came through the Cooperative Science and Monitoring Initiative, and this was the 2023 CSMI year for Lake Ontario. So thank you very much to our partners, and thank you very much to our funders as well. To jump right in, give you a background about lake trout in Lake Ontario. Colin just did a great job, so we can kind of scoot through this rather quickly. But just a little bit of background, lake trout stocks started to decline long before the 1900s, but we saw the most recent decline in the 1930s, leading to functional extirpation by the 1960s. The good news in all of this is a collaborative binational stocking program has helped reestablish the adult population. So starting by the late 1980s, we started seeing a rebound in the adult population in Lake Ontario. That being said, there is still some bad news, and that is that wild recruitment to the adult population remains very low. So this is a figure from Brian O'Malley's GillNet annual GillNet report from 2024. This takes place on the U.S. side of Lake Ontario. And what he saw was that the percent wild of adult lake trout really hasn't changed much over the time period that we've been studying this, and it sits right around 2%. So in 2021, the Lake Ontario Technical Committee Lake Trout Working Group, a mouthful there, identified the current impediments that we believed were occurring in Lake Ontario. And overwhelmingly, we agreed that it seems that these impediments are occurring at the early life stages, and this is what seems to be preventing any meaningful recruitment to the adult population. In this document that we published on the Fish Commission's website, we identified habitat and specifically habitat degradation for spawning habitats as the leading mechanism or one of the leading mechanisms causing this lack in survival of early life stages. So is habitat action impediment? To be able to answer this question, we need to have kind of a comprehensive understanding of where spawning habitat is and where it historically was. So the best information that we have from there is the Carroll Goodyear et al. 1982 spawning atlas of Lake Ontario that had compiled kind of the commercial fisheries from the 18 and 1900s to identify spawning sites. Now, while this information is great, there's a couple caveats here. The first is that the historic sites were identified while there was still a wild stock of lake trout. And in contemporary Lake Ontario, 99% of the stock, at least on the US side, is hatchery origin, as we just saw from Brian O'Malley's data. The second caveat, Lucas Letarte is going to get into a bit more in this next presentation, so I'll leave it to him. But just briefly, we know that there is spawning habitat degradation at certain sites. So one of the best examples of this is Stony Island, which was heavily studied by Ellen Marsden in the 1980s, where she found some of the highest lake trout egg depositions in the Great Lakes at that time at this site. Past 30 years, Stacy Fergal and her master's thesis revisited this site and collected a single lake trout egg over 2 years of sampling and noted that the habitat looked pretty starkly different than Ellen saw in 1980s. So we've also had the colonization introduction of descended mussels since the Carroll, the Goodyear spawning atlas. And so these may have changed the way in which lake trout are using these or not using these historic spawning sites. Okay, so we have a guiding question for our project, and that is, where are lake trout spawning in temporary Lake Ontario? Through that question, we have two different objectives. The first is more broad scale, and it's to determine the spatial distribution of lake trout spawning habitat, and that's going to occur in years 1 and 2. We're currently in year 2 of that. The second objective is more fine scale, and that is determine site-specific spawning habitat characteristics, and these are things like depth of water, substrate type and quality, and then interstitial flow and aspect of those currents on the bottom of these habitats. Because this is happening in years 3 and 4, we're not there yet. We'll only be focusing today on objective number 1. To answer these research questions and objectives, we are using acoustic telemetry. The basic principle here is that we surgically implant an acoustic transmitter. So here you can see in this image, this red tag is the acoustic transmitter. Once that is inserted into the fish, it begins to transmit a unique sound sequence that's unique to that individual fish and that tag. Acoustic receivers, which are then placed throughout the lake, are able to receive that sound sequence and timestamp the detection. And this is really important because by telling us the approximate location of the fish and the time that that fish was there, we can use that information to infer spawning locations. Tagging for our project took place in the spring of 2023 and the spring of 2024. Now we wanted to tag in the spring instead of the fall because we wanted to tag from a mixed population, so we had a better chance of finding additional spawning sites, right? Because if you tag in the fall, there's the potential that the fish are just going to return to the same sites that you had originally tagged them from. We had collected fish with gill nets and with the aid of local charter fishermen who helped us collect fish. There was 382 total fish tagged throughout the sampling period with a average length of about 745 millimeters. We were targeting adult reproductively mature fish, so anything over 500 millimeters was tagged. The origin of these fish was 95% from the hatchery and 5% wild origin, though there's an asterisk there because this is a conservative number. There are differences in how the US and the Canadian hatcheries mark their fish before they're released in Lake Ontario. And the most conservative estimate we have with the markings was 5% wild, though this number may change as we get into some of the genetics of these fish. Using genetics, we were also able to get a ratio of males to females. It was about half and half, 55% male to 45% female. And we were able to get strain assignment from each of the fish as well, though that data is still being worked up. It will be incorporated into the next round of data analysis. Okay, so let's get into the fun part, right? Let's start looking at some of these results of distributions of lake trout on a lake scale. So one of the ways we can look at this data is by plotting the number of lake trout that were detected at each receiver. So this time period is from November 1st to November 21st of 2023. And we chose these dates to represent in this figure because this is the time that surface water temperatures hit 10 degrees Celsius and lower. And this corresponds really nicely with lake trout spawning. So obviously there's going to be some differences depending on where you are in Lake Ontario. But this is an overarching time period where water temperatures were appropriate for spawning. So looking at this figure, the black dots here are acoustic receivers and the green dots are fish. So the larger those green dots are, the more fish were detected there. And we can start to see some general patterns. One, maybe the most obvious, is that spawning or at least the fish detections at this time are very widely distributed, right? There's not a single spawning location here. It looks like fish are using both the north and the south shoreline pretty well. Even areas like the Niagara River up into the gorge zone, lake trout are being detected at that time as well. Another way of looking at this data is to use the actual fish positions or detections rather than just individual fish counts. So Kyle Morton at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service put this figure together, and basically what it does is it standardizes the number of detections over that time period up here from November 1st to the 21st for every single fish, and then it sums the average location of those. And the take home here is the hotter the color is, so the more yellow or red that it is, the more detections and fish were in those boxes. So it gives us some understanding of at a lake scale what are some of the areas that are being used more than others. Though we have to point out here that we did not tag an equal number of fish in each region. And if fish are generally staying in the same regions as they were tagged, then it might bias the numbers. So we might have to do this at a regional scale instead of a lake scale. And then finally, another little tidbit of information that's kind of interesting is when we look at some of these spots that are kind of the hottest returns for fish, and overlap those with the U.S. stocking locations through time. Now, admittedly, these aren't all the stocking locations, and they can vary from year to year. We do see that there are quite a bit of detections in those areas, and we don't know if that's because fish are kind of staying in the same areas that they were stocked, or maybe there is just random chance that where we're putting these fish is also historic or contemporary spawning sites. So the more and more we dig into this data, the more we'll be able to determine from it. All right, now let's look at some individual behaviors here. This is a video of a single lake trout. So again, black dots here are receivers. This time it's just going to be one uh, lake trout moving around the lake, and the orange cross there is the tagging location. So this fish is kind of your typical homebody, which has been described before in the literature for lake trout. Doesn't seem to have a very large home range, kind of within 100 kilometers. We don't know where this fish originally was stocked from, but it was a hatchery fish. So if it was stocked from the same area where we tagged it, it makes sense that it didn't move very far. As we get closer to the spawning season, which is about right now, you'll see the fish make more erratic movements. Suggesting maybe it's looking for aggregations of fish or spawning habitats. All right, let's look at a very different behavior from one of our tagged fish. So this fish was tagged near the Niagara River in 2023, and we'll start the video and see how different this behavior is. All right, so this is very different. This is pretty cool. This fish has a much larger home range. It seems to be in the winter and the spring on the south shore and move up to the north shore throughout the summertime. It also doesn't seem to use the central basin of the lake, at least out in these deep receivers here, right? So it's not crossing the lake necessarily. It's more so following the bathymetry contours to the other side. Looks like it's up here during the spawning time and back to the south shore for overwinter. So some quick conclusions from what we've shown so far with our first objective. We're still looking at year one data. It just came in this January, so it's kind of hot off the press, and we'll know more as far as spatial distributions as we get into the data. But what we have seen is there are differences in migration behaviors and different pathways. And so we just showed an example of that with those two more um, roaming fish versus more homebodies. We've also seen that lake trout are spatially distributed through the spawning season, meaning that there isn't some central spawning shoal within Lake Ontario. It seems to be distributed pretty widely through the shoreline. Speaking of this wide distribution of seemingly lots of spawning habitat in Lake Ontario, we can compare that to what Jim Markham and his crew have been seeing with their telemetry in Lake Erie. So this picture appears from Jim's 2021 Lower Lakes meeting, and it shows quite a few lake trout that they had tagged. I think they had tagged just south of 300. But it seems like they use very limited amounts of habitat within the eastern basin of Lake Erie. So we compare that to what we're seeing at the same time. So now both of these pictures are showing the same spawning period as far as November, just in each respective lake. We have pretty broad scale distribution of spawning. It's not like all the fish are using a couple spawning shoals in one basin of the lake. So we're going to have to attack this with a few different statistical analyses to kind of parse apart where the largest congregations of fish actually are. All right, so I'll just very quickly wrap it up here with some next steps. We have continued analysis. Like I said, the data just came in January, so we have quite a bit more work to do, specifically looking at regional analyses so we can look at the differences in sample sizes of where we tagged fish. We also have depth data from our tagged fish, so we can look at distributions as far as water depths during spawning seasons as well. We can identify differences in spawning sites by origin. So are there differences between hatchery and wild fish? And also by strains or deeper strains like Klondike and Humber strains, are these using different spawning habitats than lean strains like a Seneca lake trout? And finally, we're looking to identify high use sites for fine scale analysis to kind of guide this year 3 and year 4 approach coming up. With that, I just want to say thank you very much for listening to the presentation today. Thank you to our partners that have helped produce this research and to our funders. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to my email, or if there's anyone in the crowd today that was able to make it, that's a collaborator, I'm sure they'll be able to answer your questions as well. Thank you very much.